Good morning. Welcome back. We are on chapter 8 now. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. And once again, I will go through a summary of the chapter, and then I will go through an analysis of the individual items that are in the chapter that I feel like are important to either note as far as characters or as far as the storyline are concerned. And I also keep track of some of the figurative language in the book and provide some vocabulary words. So here's an analysis of the chapter. First of all, I put on here a picture of this is an AI generated picture of a young girl in 1930s to represent our character of Lily and Jean. In the first part of this chapter, we have something developing, that's all we know at this point, between Lily and Jean and Cassie. Cassie's up to something. And the very first part of the chapter just kind of goes into her actions, Cassie's actions, and what she's doing. And we don't know what she's planning at, but we have known enough about Cassie and her character to know that she's up to something. And the next thing that we have in here is we have a scene where we have Cassie and Papa's talking to Cassie. So it's almost like Papa knows that Cassie is up to something as well, and he's not really asking her what she's up to, but he really wants to make sure that whatever it is that she's doing, that she makes sure that it's well thought out. So that's the next section that we have going on in our chapter. Then we have a brief time in this chapter where we're just focusing on exactly what is happening. So looking at exactly how Cassie is treating Lily and Jean. And once again, it's all build up. We know something big is coming, but we just don't know what until we get a little further into the chapter. And then we find out. We find out exactly what Cassie was planning and how she has been plotting her revenge on Lily and Jean, and there's a scene that deals with that. So this chapter starts to have some of our bigger conflicts kind of coming a little bit more to a head. Obviously, the book's not done yet, so we know that more is going to happen, but we can see some of these events building and some of these things coming to a head. The next thing we have is a scene where we're back at school, and this is our depiction of Mama. And basically the school board walks in and they start questioning Mama and what she's doing and where exactly that she's finding the material that she is teaching, because it doesn't align with the books from chapter 1. And we have the fallout from the school board coming in to the classroom and Ms. Logan not teaching what she's supposed to be teaching. And that's a very difficult part of the story as well. It obviously adds to the drama, it adds to the conflict, it definitely adds to the storyline when we find out what's going on, and it leads to what happens ultimately between TJ, who's depicted over here, and Stacy. So the rest of the chapter then deals with TJ's role in what happened with Ms. Logan and Stacy coming to terms somewhat with what TJ has done and the kind of person that TJ is. And that's how we end the chapter, is this whole conflict building between Stacy and TJ. So let's get into the analysis part. Okay, so in the analysis of our chapter, this first page of the chapter, we have a colloquialism, and that's because here it says, Cassie, you cracked. It's not necessarily a term that we still use. Now we might say, you're crazy. But that wasn't what was used then. So in this day and age that the story is placed, they're using different terms than the ones that we use today. So this is a colloquialism because it's not something that we're still familiar with, but we still can figure out what it means. And then we have Stacy's words fading into the gray stillness of the January morning. Obviously, words can't do much of anything, so that is personification. Next page, I have two two phrases or a vocabulary that I want you to be familiar with. This one is piped. So look that one up. And then this one I have a little bit more of a phrase. It says Uncle Tomming. I could have also marked this, I guess, as a colloquialism because it's something that would have been familiar to people of that era and that time. But I did mark it as vocabulary. It's something I just want my learners to be aware of, my students to be aware of. Up here's an idiom, hold my tongue. We still say that today, so that one is an example of an idiom. This is another idiom down here. He stared directly at TJ and caught his eye. We know what that means as well. We still use that one today, that phrase. Obviously, we're not running around catching eyeballs that are moving around, so it is a figurative language, but it is an idiom because we know what it means to catch someone's eye. Down here, this one is a personification. It says, my temper almost flew out of my mouth, but I pressed my lips tightly together, forcing it to stay inside. That is a wonderful example of somebody holding their tongue and not saying the thoughts that are in their head. So that's wonderful. And then back up here, we're seeing a little bit about Jeremy. We already know from the past, excuse me, in the story, that Jeremy does not necessarily feel the same way about the racial boundaries as the other people in the area feel. And this kind of shows that just a little bit more. Next page, vocabulary, I have feigned. Figurative language, I have marked this sentence here where it says, observing the soft mourning of the forest. Obviously, a forest can't feel sad, so that's a nice description, though, of what has happened and how Cassie sees that playing out in later times when the parts of the forest have been cut down. And this one says, the trees are standing like sentinels on the edge of the hollow listening. Well, trees can't do any of those things, so that is definitely an example of personification. This is in the summary. I talked about the scene between Papa and Cassie, and this gives us a lot of insight into the character, once again, of Papa. And in here, Papa, like, I know that he knows Cassie's up to something, and I can tell that because, like, in this sentence, for example, it says, you're a lot like me, Cassie girl, but you got yourself a bad temper like your Uncle Hammer. That temper can get you in trouble. So he's acknowledging that he realizes that Cassie's up to something, but he's not demanding to know or anything like that. He's just encouraging her to make sure that the choices that she is making are good ones. So I have this all marked as part of the personality development of Papa and Cassie. Next page. I really like this quote by Papa. It said, there are things you can't back down on, things you got to take a stand on, but it's up to you to decide what them things are. You have to demand respect in this world. Ain't nobody just going to hand it to you. How you carry yourself, what you stand for, that's how you gain respect. That is a great life lesson, just in general. That's for all of us. Young, old, doesn't matter. We have to decide what we're going to stand for and then be prepared to stand up for it. So I love that quote by Papa, and it says a lot about Papa and the way that he parents and his character development. I have more down here about Papa, making sure that he wants to make sure that Cassie understands what she's getting herself into with whatever she's up to. But he's also saying, like, I think you've got this on your own. So he's really, helping her develop her own character as well. Next page, we're talking a little bit more about that theme of racism. We see Lillian Jean and her acceptance of the way that Cassie's treating her is something that should be happening. And it says, like here, it says, when I called her Ms. Lillian Jean, and she's confiding her secrets in her and talking about the Ms. Lillian Jean and how that is enough to have Lillian Jean just tell her anything. And then we have the character of Cassie and foreshadowing. It said, I almost hated to see the source dry up. So we know something's going to come. We know something that this is coming to a head when she says, I almost hated to see the source dry up. We don't know what's coming yet. We know something's coming, and we see a little bit more of that character of Cassie developing. This one says, it was obvious that the jovial mask TJ always wore had been stripped away. So TJ's face and demeanor are being compared to a mask. So that is a direct comparison, but it doesn't use the words like or as. So it's a metaphor. Next page, We see a little bit more about TJ, and this is also leading up to the conflict that is in this chapter between TJ and Stacy. He got caught cheating again, so we see his response with TJ here. We see his response and how he feels about the cheating. Obviously, it's not his fault. She could have just let it go. She didn't have to pay any attention to that. So we see more of TJ's character developing. And then this one is a personification. It says the road swelled into a small hill. Road obviously can't do much of anything by itself, so that is personification. We have the character development here, more of Cassie. I was sweeping the road looking for the deep wooded trail I had selected earlier in the week. So she's making a plan. She has a very well laid out plan for what's going to happen. So I marked that as part of Cassie's character development. This is a simile and an allusion. She's grinning like a Cheshire cat. So this is a simile because it's a comparison using like or as. But I marked it as an allusion as well because we need to know what it means to be grinning like a Cheshire cat. So if you don't know, you might want to look that up. And then we go a little bit more into this character development of Cassie, where she says, right here, I said, smashing Lily and Jean's books on the ground. So we're seeing Cassie's plan come to fruition. And then I have several things marked on this page that have to do with the event that happens. I'm not going to outline the event. That will be for class discussion. But I'm going to go ahead and mark some of the important things that are happening here that have to do with that event and how we can look at those as being part of Cassie's character and the development of her character in this story. This is a hyperbole here. It says, you'd be laughed clear up to Jackson. So obviously, it's an exaggeration. You can't laugh somebody up anywhere. So Jackson must be a very far distance away, at least in Cassie's mind, for her to be laughed that far away. So very good character development here of Cassie. Next page, I have marked an idiom. Your slate is clean. Everyone seems to know what that means. Even though we no longer use chalkboard slates in our classroom, we still know what it means to have a clean slate. Personification, I tried to pay attention to Miss Crocker, but the cold creeping under the windowsill made it impossible. Cold can't creep, so that is definitely an example of a personification. Heart's content, that is not content, it's content. Make sure you get the correct definition for that word. Banished me, we need to know what banished means. All I can think of when I hear the word banished is from the movie The Little Mermaid. So, but banished is a good word to know the meaning of. Then we have a little bit more of that character development of Cassie. She seems to know instantly that there's problems when the men enter the building, and she is going to definitely figure out what's going on and get her nose in the middle of it and see what's happening. So we see her taking action to try to see what's happening. And this is, I have this marked as the theme or the conflict of that racism and money that go throughout the story. We have racism as they're looking at what she's teaching and they're making judgments on what she is teaching. And down here, it's what exactly it is that she's teaching. And of course, the school board says, where is that in your book? Which is over here. And we have Mama being very brave, and she's saying, Mr. Granger says, I don't see all them things you're teaching in here. And that's because they're not in here, Mama said. So this is both the character of Mama. We see where Cassie gets some of her backbone and grit. It's from her mama, and her mama standing for what's right and trying to do things maybe that aren't quite as politically correct for the time as they should be. And of course, there's a lot of fallout in this chapter from that happening. So we have the conflict of racism and money both playing out in here with what happens with Mama. And over on the next page, we have Mama, and she's loses her job as a result of what happens in this chapter, as a result of, we'll find out in a minute, TJ and what he says. But we see how she is responding to that, and Mama's not answering immediately. When she did, her voice was muffled. Maybe somewhere else, but not here. So she won't be teaching where she is anymore, at least not for a while. and Mama trying to figure out what, she's saying, I taught things some folks just didn't want to hear. So we see some of that grit that Mama has in trying to do what's right. I said that's where Cassie gets part of her character. And then we have Cassie who says she feels resentful and angry and she hated Mr. Granger. And so we have Cassie's response to what has happened to her mother there. Next page. Papa is tough as he can be in some instances. Here we see Papa and how he feels about Mama. It says he gently pushed the stray back over her ear. We'll get by, plant more cotton, but we'll get by. He's trying to assure her that everything's going to be okay. And we have Mr. Morrison. And Mr. Morrison is offering to leave. And we have the family's response to that, because they don't want him to go anywhere. And Mr. Morrison is saying, I got a nice house to live in, the best cooking a man could want, and a family. So Mr. Morrison is talking about how he feels that he fits into the family dynamic, even though he hasn't been there very long. We have a few vocabulary words. We have barren, a barren garden. We have rasped. Do we need to figure out what rasp means? Make sure it's not the noun, which would be describing an object, a woodworking object called a rasp. Not that. It's another one. Make sure you get the right definition. And then I want you to make sure that you understand what a tenant farmer is. So look up that term. And then I have a simile marked here. She's born to teach like the sun is born to shine. It's a comparison using like or as, so it's a simile. Next page. 3 vocabulary words on here. We have interjected, morosely, and prophesied. So those are the 3 vocabulary words for this page. On here we have, I have this one marked as Papa and Mama, even though Papa's doing the speaking. I have it marked as both because Papa is describing Mama and how he feels about Mama. Down on this one we have TJ, and we're kind of finding out what TJ's role in this whole event is. So Willie Wiggins is talking about TJ and what he heard TJ say. So apparently he didn't like it very much. Willie didn't, and he wants the family to know. Little man over here is showing his strength and how he feels about the whole situation with Mama. Obviously he's angry and doesn't want his Mama to be in the situation that she's in. Next page, I have 2 vocabulary words marked. I have bewildered and fallow. So make sure you get those figured out. Personification, the threaded wagon trail which cut through the fields leading from the distant Granger mansion revealed a thin woman stepping briskly toward us. So paths through a field can't reveal anything or anyone. They're not like going, here she is. So it's just a nice kind of description of you think you see somebody coming from far away, but you're not quite sure, and then you can start to tell that there's someone coming that way. This is a little bit more about TJ, and he's saying that he's got a right to be mad, doesn't he? After all, she failed him again. We all know whose fault it is if someone fails something. Next page, 3 vocabulary words: shunned, testily, and indignant. This book does have a lot of vocabulary, I know, in it, but they're all good words. So let's look those up. We have a little bit more about TJ, and TJ is trying to say that it's little Willie Wiggins is the problem because he's going around telling something that isn't true. So not exactly being honest again. And then Stacy over here, we start to see Stacy and how he feels about what TJ has done. He says, now leave us alone. We don't want no more to do with you. And then TJ is understanding that he doesn't have friends anymore where he thought he did. And starts to yell at him saying, I'm tired of hanging around you guys anyway. I should have known better what I look like having a bunch of little kids around all the time, me near 14. And then he's talking about his new friends. They give me things and treat me like I'm a man, and they white too. And then this sentence here I kind of marked, it's just a very well written sentence. His voice faded into the wind. as we left him, and we heard no more. So it's personification. It's a little bit of foreshadowing. Something's obviously going to happen with TJ. We've heard some about TJ and the new white friends that he has, and we already know they're up to no good. So it's personification because the voice can't fade into the wind. And it's also foreshadowing because we know that there's going to be further trouble. So stay tuned for chapter 9.